and welcome to another Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. My name's Eric, and I have with us Keith Manier. Keith is the senior pastor at Grace Fellowship Church in Pickerington, Ohio, just outside of Columbus. And Keith, my first question for you, why does it take two people to spell a four-letter state?
I don't even know what that means. What does that mean?
O-H.
I-O. The group spelling that is Central and the surrounding areas of Ohio, no doubt.
I love it. Well, you're an Ohio State fan.
For sure.
I'm a Notre Dame fan. We've battled over this before, and your team got the better of us. So
we have for a long time directly with y'all.
All right. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But we'll see you again soon.
Yep.
Yeah.
You have a Buckeye at the helm coaching the team, so there's probably continued brighter days ahead.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. I'll take it. I love Marcus Freeman. No, I had to ask you that just first, so ruffle your feathers a little bit.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah. Well, we're at Momentum Youth Conference, and it's a joy just to get to be in this environment, and I'm so pumped that you're back this year at Momentum as a guest speaker. How many? Do you know off the top of your head how many times?
It's more than 10, but I'm not sure anymore.
Somebody was asking me the other day, and I'm like, I can't even do the math.
Yeah.
I started as a student in this youth conference. I remember getting in trouble, like lying, telling girls in middle school that I was on the photography team so that I could get my picture with them. Right? Like that kind of stuff. So, and now getting to just be involved in, so it's so fun. You've been a speaker here, but your church is also here.
Yep.
So just share a little bit about that.
Yeah. We have a pretty large church in Central Ohio, multiple campuses. And so between students and leaders, we have over 300 folks that are here this weekend. And it's just a blast. It's always a really important part of the rhythm of our student ministry and of our church. And really excited to have Grace Fellowship and its various student ministry teams being here and be a part of this week.
Yeah. It's amazing to see what God is doing. Even last night and just this whole week, so to our listeners, go and watch, we'll link to it, but go and watch the sessions. Keith is speaking tonight, and our theme is all in, all out, and we're helping these students really wrestle with what does it look like to go all in for Jesus in order that we could live all out for him, because he sends us out to be commissioned.
Yep.
So Keith, tell us a little bit about your church. God's done incredible things in and through Grace Fellowship. And so how tell us structure of the church, a little bit about your church.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's crazy to say this at this point, but I've been the lead pastor there now for 21 years as of a few weeks ago. And so showed up at a church that was trying to figure out what was next for it. It was hopeful with some people in a core team, but was struggling. So my very first weekend 21 years ago, like 54 people or something like that. And now, normal weekends are right around 5,000 people, multiple campuses. And it's just been incredible to see what God's done. The people that have come to faith, people getting baptized, marriages, families restored, all the stuff that we know God says he's going to do and can do and does do, and those of us that are in the church world see. And so I am incredibly blessed to be a part of an amazing team on all the different levels at Grace, from our elders to our staff to volunteer teams and all of it. And so Grace sits with its main campus, if you want to think about broadcast campus and a multi-site video venue world in Pickerington, just outside of Columbus, and then we're around primarily the east side of Columbus beyond that. So been an incredible journey and so grateful for what God's done.
All right, 21 years being involved in that and getting to see that whole process. Go back one step. How did you know that God was even calling you to go into full-time ministry or the pathway into being a senior pastor?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Eric, that's a long conversation, probably longer than this podcast. The word calling is such a big word, right? And it's such a loaded word. And in one sense, we really try to disciple every believer to believe that the Bible says everybody's called into full-time ministry, right?
Sure.
And I just happen to get a paycheck from a church. Other people don't.
Yep.
So I've always felt called to be on mission and be in ministry. And I know that's not what you're asking, but as I press that forward, there was a very unique week in my life, which culminated in this opportunity for 3 very different paths. And I'll try to do my best to be pretty quick. But basically the 3 paths were, one was a major career opportunity for a really large company in the chemistry world, which is what I have one of my degrees in, and in Wisconsin. Another one was my wife and I lived in Cambodia for 6 months. We were looking to be global missionaries. And then the last one was this small church that was coming down from its heights and was figuring out if it was going to survive and couldn't even pay its mortgage. And I interviewed with the church on a Sunday. I interviewed with this company called Kimberly-Clark on a Monday and Tuesday. On Thursday, we found out we got approved to be global missionaries in Cambodia. On Friday, I got offered both jobs. So I found myself on this Friday going, what do I want to be when I grow up, after I was kind of doing life. And my wife and I just started talking, praying, seeking people we loved, seeking people that we trusted. And in that, what I felt like was not some call to, go preach the gospel or some call to vocational ministry, but I felt called to that church in that place. And what I would say is standing orders are good orders until you're given new orders. And I was called to go there and called to be a part of that, and I haven't felt called away. I haven't felt called like I'm supposed to go do something else. And so I feel like my call has been to do the next right thing at that church. And that's what I've tried to do for 21 years. It certainly hasn't been perfect, and I've made a lot of mistakes. But I felt called into that church and that space and that opportunity. And a lot of what led me to choose that door over those other 2 were not some... I don't think God's going to love me. He's going to love me less if I choose the other ones. I don't think I could be effective at the other ones. I don't think God could use it. It wasn't any of that. It was people around me going, we see this in you, and we think this would be an incredible thing for the kingdom. So I stepped into that. That's a very condensed version, and have always felt like the Lord has had a unique way of using me in leadership and influence with communication and vision and direction. And so I've seen that since I became a Christian when I was 13, and the things that have gone on in my life. And so the church was kind of the next step in that. And anyways, there's more that could be said, but that's gives awesome. Us enough.
I think that's awesome. And I appreciate you even casting vision for what it looks like for calling. We're all called. Katie Cole was even in here yesterday. We did a podcast, and that one will be coming out soon. But the big deal of like, we're all part of building God's church, of investing in his kingdom. And so that in and of itself is amazing. So I love that, like, you had these different opportunities, and being faithful with what God's given and stepping through the doors that are open. As you've done that, how have you been able to give opportunity then to others who are maybe behind you in that process or trying to figure that out? I know you help us with Momentum Pro. You and Jeff lead a senior pastor cohort. You are so gifted in that. And so it's kind of where I want to take the conversation even. But just before we dive into this conversation of equipping other senior pastors, what does that look like on a normal basis? How do you hold space for all that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I just look back in my journey in ministry, before I was a pastor, but certainly when I became a pastor, was there were times where I picked up the phone or I sent an email and said, hey, I'd love to meet with you. I'd love to get help. I have a question. And there were people who took those calls and people who didn't, people who answered those emails and people who didn't. And I just made a promise to myself that I would always be a person that took those calls and had those meetings and answered those emails. And I've tried to drill that down into our staff. In fact, in our orientation, one of the things I say to new staff members is, there's not much that will fire me up more than if I find out that you didn't invest in another kingdom partner when they ask for help, whoever that is. So they want to know how we do safety services. They want to know how we do weekends. They want to know how we do discipleship. We're going to meet with them and we're going to tell them. So part of it was my own experience of seeing the unbelievable helpfulness and charity and grace and benefit of what people did for me. And then the truth is, man, God and his grace is just, he's blessed and gifted us with so many people around. And what a lot of people just need is cultivated and direction and help. And they just need someone that'll sit with them and process things out. And so I just want to be a part of that conversation. And I want to be a part of, I believe in the church and I believe in the local church. And I want those things to be as great as they can be. And so whatever I can do to do that, I want to do that. Now, what I found along the way for me is God's organize my brain in a unique way. You've been in rooms with me where you've seen this. It's nothing I can take credit for. But what I'm pretty good at doing is curating a lot of content into a reproducible way. Yeah. And so what I've found is I'm pretty helpful at helping other people move forward, because I can take a lot of different things. I can take 5 podcasts and 3 books I've read and distill it into some talking points about staff and reproduce it to people. Yeah. And so that's been something I feel like I've felt God uniquely kind of gift me with, and I just want to steward it well. I want to try to do my best with it. So Momentum Pro has been a part of that, investing in other pastors and leaders. And then I love, as personally within my own staff, some of my favorite weeks of church and some of my favorite things that go on are when we have ministry wins and I don't have anything to do with it. Yep. I love when we see, preachers and communicators that we've created a system for and we've developed that are just crushing it, and I'm not a part of anything other than the infrastructure that helped create the system. Yep. But I love that, and so I get really excited to see people move forward with their gifts.
Very cool. All right, one last kind of question that jogged in my mind of you've been in partnership with Momentum for a long time. Yeah. But what have you seen God do in and through that partnership, even in your local church? I know your student ministry comes to Momentum Youth Conference, like you mentioned. Your church has been involved with the urban centers. You're talking about Momentum Pro. So, like, for somebody listening who's a senior pastor and like, what is all this? What has God done in through your church with some of that as a result?
I mean, God's done a lot. I mean, and He's done a lot, beginning with things He's done in me, all the way through the various places that what He does in me impacts our staff, and then how it's impacted our staff directly, and then to our students and beyond. I think one of the things I've just seen in ministry is if you find there's lots of reasons to look around and go, well, they might do this or they might do that. But if you can find a partner that you believe in is solid on all the core things they should be solid on, and then do enough time in life with them, you can see some really cool things happen if you stay invested. Yeah. I often joke with people that when it comes to church like administration, that the best management system is always the next management system. I think sometimes in ministry, people are always like, the best partner will be the next partner. And I would actually say, I think one of the best ways to have great partnerships is to stay with them. And so what I've just seen is that we've stayed with what Momentum has been and how they've grown and changed. Yeah. That's not been a hot challenge, because we believe in Momentum and they do a good job. But I think the faithfulness, the ongoing partnership where we've had a seat at the table, you've heard from us, you've asked from us, we've tried to work together. And so, all the way back to how is it, I've got great friendships. I've got great mentors and relationships that have shaped me and made me a better pastor. I've had opportunities to lead and influence the people of Momentum. Our students, we've had students that have met Jesus here and students that have said yes to following Jesus into vocational ministry through these things. We've had staff members that have been developed and trained and equipped. And then we've had staff members that have been a part of the training and equipping. And so we've just kind of seen all the various sides of the ecosystem. And Eric, I think part of the reason that's happened is we've stayed with it for a long time. Yeah. We've been around it for a long time. We've watched leaders change, and we've watched groups change, and we've seen different speakers, and there's been better weeks and not as good weeks and great weeks, and all of that, the faithfulness of doing that together, I think we've just seen it. And then it's sort of putting a bow on this, it's impacted our people in all the ways that ministry is supposed to impact your people. I think one of the things that I love as a senior leader about Momentum is committed to sort of the entire pie of ministry and gospel life. I think there's some conferences that are, and some ministries that are maybe even better at the evangelistic side, others that may be even better at the discipleship side, others that might be better at training to the leadership side alone. I think Momentum's sweet spot is that it finds a way to holistically think about all those things. And even the way we approach conference, all in, all out, is a picture of that. Yeah, it's both sides of that. And so I love that. And I love how that's impacted our church, our leaders, myself. And I love that Momentum thinks about, of course, we want people to meet Jesus, but we also don't want them to stay where they are. We want them to think about how they're investing in the kingdom. Yeah. That whole piece has been very exciting for me and my church.
Well, on behalf of Momentum, thank you for partnering that.
Yeah.
But I know it's our heartbeat that we want other churches to find those communities and have those trusted partnerships, because the impact of that is huge.
Yeah.
And so when you get in those environments, the conferences, the cohorts, whatever it is, and you learn from each other and people who are like-minded and are able to like challenge you in areas, or maybe they're, they just broke 200 barrier in their church, and you're like, hey, I need to call you because I'm struggling with, or how do you raise $1 million for a building campaign? And you're like, well, this is what we did, but here, that stuff matters greatly. And I think it's such a beautiful picture of Acts 2 and how to meet each other's needs and how to build God's kingdom. And so I'm super passionate about seeing more churches connect and be a part of that.
Yeah, and relationship, longer relationships build trust.
Yes.
Trust is the currency to which real information can be exchanged.
Yep.
There's a lot of books, a lot of podcasts, a lot of places to go get content about how to just conceptually understand something. But to be able to truly dialogue, go back and forth, requires relationship. Relationship requires time.
Yes.
So time in matters. And so being able to sit and see people and see organizations and individual people change and their arcs and their strengths and weaknesses, and then the same thing with you. There's a beauty to that. And so I love that that's been able to happen with our church, with me, with our leaders, and all of those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, all right, let's do this. So I know that you have senior pastors ask you all the time. So I went to AI and I said, hey, ChatGPT, when senior pastors are in the room, what are the top questions? Now I edited some of this.
Sure.
But basically, then I said, put it in categories, and you got 5 options to pick from.
Okay.
And so I'm going to read these to you, and whatever one you decide is you're feeling today, then we can dive in deeper into that topic.
Great.
First one is personal and spiritual leadership. Second one is church vision, growth, and health. Third one is leadership development and team culture. The fourth one is accountability and peer support. And the fifth one is pastoral credibility and community perception. What do you think?
Okay, let's go with the last one. There's been some decisions that we've made recently that I think, it lends itself to this. And I've also seen some of the community perception piece going from a small church to a large church and a multi-site church. So interested to see where our good friend ChatGPT takes us.
I love it. Well, it's fun because we have throughout this week here multiple lead pastors that I'm doing the same template. So to our listeners, come back, check it out, because who knows what other pastors are going to pick. So, all right, here goes. Here's one of the context. How are you building trust with your congregation and broader in the community? So 2 concentric circles there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Congregation, obviously, we'll start there and then we'll go to the community. Congregation, particularly in a church, any church that gets over 300, 500 people is really hard. And then when you add multi-site to that, it's really, really difficult. I think there's a few things that I would say to this that are broad, and then a few like practical things. Broad is make sure you're managing your own Christian life really, really well. The most important thing I bring to Grace Fellowship is not my preaching, it's not my leadership, it's my relationship with Jesus, my intimacy with Jesus. And so I think you build trust and credibility with your church when it's clear to them you're serious about Jesus. So I think building your faith, and that also means stewarding your family to the best ability. And all pastors have this incredibly difficult tension of trying to really raise their children to love Jesus and have the right kind of family, but also knowing you can never be perfect and, glass house and all that stuff. But being serious about your faith, and then also managing your home well. I think another big thing I would say is be good at your craft. So if you're supposed to preach, be a good preacher. If you're supposed to sing, be good at singing. If you're supposed to lead, be good at leading. Do your thing well. Performance earns credibility, and especially with people that you don't have a relationship with. And so I think another broad principle that I'll say about this is your job as a leader is to try to lead people from here to there to the best you can. You're not always going to get it right. So everyone needs to put down the fear of I'm going to get it wrong, because I'll just tell you, you're going to get it wrong. What you have to be able to do is confess clarity about where you got it wrong and turn. So one of the ways you build trust is as fast as you admit that you got it wrong, you articulate that you got it wrong, you bring clarity to the situation, and you tell people why you're going to do what you're going to do. So those are some broad things as a church. I think there's some other small things. On one level, I was just telling an intern this the other day, the power of learning names. You build trust with people when you learn people's names. One of the things that I try to do when I meet people is say their name 3 times in 1 minute. Eric, it's great to meet you. Eric, are you married? Eric, what do you do? How do you do that?
Yep.
You can build trust with people really, really quick when you do that. How do you create environments that shrink your community down to give people access to you?
Yep.
So for us, we do these things that are these unique Thursday night dinners. We do these weekend retreats. I go to men's retreats. I try to put myself in spaces where I can, do that down. And then the people that I'm around on a regular basis, I do my best to try to be present and, give access. So those are some pragmatic things about the church. Okay.
Yeah.
In the community, I think, as the professional and the pastor, again, I would go back to what I said a minute ago, be good at your job. So when people show up and people come around and they see you doing it, do it. Be involved in the community, find ways to be present. So for me, one of the things is I am a chaplain leadership developer for one of the public school football teams in town.
Nice.
And I've been invited in that space, which is great. Yeah. But now I have access to a bunch of young people and the coaches. Yeah. I'm a AAU coach for a local AAU basketball program in town. I have kids that are in athletics and in dance, and so I'm present in those things. And when I'm present, as much as sometimes I don't want to be engaged with people, I work my best to be engaged with people and build relationships. So I think be good at your job, be someone that's finding ways to get involved in the community. When people ask you, I try to believe in the scalpel approach, not shotgun, meaning less things deeper rather than more things shallow. So I try to say, what are the things I'm going to commit to? And I do that. I mean, on the ministry side, for example, Momentum Ministry Partners is one of those. In the community, I have a few of those that I've really leaned into. So it's all those things. It's trying to make your church care about the community and do everything it can. So I think that gets kind of to the heart of some of the big stuff.
I think it's so funny that earlier you said like you have this gift of kind of communicating, being succinct, and here I asked you a very complicated 2-part question and you got both of them and articulated all these crazy things that your church does. And so Keith, you might be getting a lot of phone calls from people. I love that. And to your point, you're spot on in all of that, of like the credibility. And so we honestly, we live in a culture now where social media and all the news outlets and things go viral and all the, and these celebrity pastors that are you almost can't go a week without hearing about something. So in a world, so chat's next question is kind of this, in a world where there are so many fallen celebrity pastors and it's known, you almost like, does it create a context? I'm asking my own question. Does it create a context where you're afraid to like tell people when you meet them in the community that you're a pastor? Because like there's a stereotype there. now.
A couple things. There's a positive side of being a pastor of a big church, and then there's a really big negative side. So one of the things I would say is when you're a pastor, small church, big church, there are people who give you credibility right off the jump that they probably shouldn't, because they don't even know anything about you, but your title and your profession sometimes earn you credibility. On the other side, that no matter how, the moment you say that, you lose credibility, right? So I had a friend say, when your church gets to 2,000, you'll have people who think you're a hero who've never met you, and you'll have people who hate you who've never met you. It's proven to be very true. I try to live by the principle of learn from all, but be defined by God. If you think I'm awesome and you tell me I'm awesome, I'll get a big head. If you think I'm terrible and you tell me I'm terrible, I'll want to quit and be suicidal. And so I try to eat the meat, spit the bones of what everyone says that's good or bad on anything. There is a reality that I try not to tell people off the jump I'm a pastor, not because of the big church or the falling of that. It's because I've just watched people who suddenly start apologizing for the thing they said on hole 4 when I've played golf with them, or they shrink back on the airplane or whatever it is. And I want to do my best to be a hospitable person. And sometimes that title can actually hurt that hospitality. Other times it can help the hospitality. I think there is a reality that if you're in ministry, and certainly if you're in ministry in a place of influence, you do just have to be mindful that people, sometimes you're going to be working uphill. And so you have to be figuring out the best thing you do to overcome that. I think if you are a sincere, genuine, godly, authentic, engaged person who's good at the work they're supposed to do, give it enough time, you'll win them. but you may have to climb uphill first for a little while. So it's certainly something I'm aware of. I've my wife and I sometimes will joke, like when we've been on a cruise ship, we'll have the meeting. Are we telling them I'm in ministry or not? Like what are we telling them? Because I don't want to tell them I'm an English teacher and to find out later I was a pastor. And so we joke about that. And
they watch your church online.
Yeah, and some of that is, again, because we're not trying to be deceptive, but we are trying to just recognize it can be odd. And this isn't the only profession, right?
Yes.
Lots of people could tell if I said I work at a morgue, people would go, whoa, I work in a crematorium. I'm whatever. There's certain
I'm a doctor.
things. Yeah.
Hey, will you look at this
exactly.
mole?
Yeah. So we all have those things, but it certainly is a reality that public perception in our culture, because of the failure of public leaders, is real. But it is so important to remind people in that conversation, for every one leader you find out that failed, there's 100 leaders that have crushed it and been awesome. And we don't, my friend always says, no one tells the story of all the planes that land safely. We only report the stories of the planes that crash. And planes, if we paid attention to every plane that landed safely, we would go, they're doing great.
Yeah.
And that's the truth in ministry a lot of times.
Yes.
There's a lot of people that are landing safely. We just don't report that story. And unfortunately, it's become a cottage industry to find out how to drum up the stuff that's bad.
Yep. That's really good. I love that you even went to the planes that land. That analogy is really helpful. I think in terms of thinking through even the statistics and some of the things around the fall of pastors.
Sure.
And when it's present and it's in your face and it's all you think about, then that can, for many people, destroy trust, because then they're already nervous to come to your church because they're going to be skeptical. So I think in that sense, how do you navigate that, or what do you do to overcome having authenticity in your services and how you lead, knowing that visitors are going to come, they've already checked out your church online. Sure. They've probably already been to your website. They've probably already looked through your socials. They've maybe even listened to you communicate already.
Yeah.
Is there thought process that goes into that, or you just kind of, you be you and you go from there?
There's a handful of things. I'll speak to some specifics in a second, but just kind of hovering in the atmosphere on this is, there's a hard thing. I've gone to my elders before and sort of jokingly, but also serious, have gone hey, what are the things you guys can actually fire me for? And not because I'm actually trying to get fired or even thinking about that, because I think one of the things is there's certain things we say, if a pastor does that, it's a fireable offense. If a pastor does that, they can never be in ministry again. If a pastor does that, if those of us who have read the Bible know that people like Paul and David had some pretty strong things in their background. And some of those guys, we would go, I don't know that we want them anywhere near one of our small groups, let alone leading a ministry. And I think there is this dialogue and understanding of where does grace, but where does standards, where does failure, where does opportunity to restore? I think that whole conversation needs to get continued to be fleshed out. Good. Because there are some people that it's just once you failed, you're done forever. And then even the category of what you can fail at and still be okay. And then there's other people that are no, we need to give mercy and grace. So that's a whole conversation. As it relates to me personally, some things I try to do is I try to be the same person no matter where I am. I used to always hear people say, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to worry about what you said. Speak like everything's going to get back to you. I try to do that in environments. When I preach, I try to tell my team and me, don't make yourself the hero. Be very, very careful to not preach yourself as always getting it right. In fact, if anything, be honest about the things that you struggle with and your failures. Ego kills an audience. When you tell people how awesome you are, you actually lose people, you don't gain people. So I want to make sure if people are going to hear about what's going on in my life, most of the time they're going to hear about either my struggles or my difficulties or what's going on. It doesn't mean every once in a while I won't use myself as a positive example. They need to hear that I deeply love Jesus. Anyone who's a guest needs to hear I deeply love Jesus. I need to be quick to own mistakes in every environment that I'm in where it's a mistake and that it makes sense. I need to just be a real human being. I think one of the things people in ministry sometimes do is they guard it like they're talking about like nuclear silo codes or something. When people ask me about my weekend, I talk about being at church the same way I would talk about going to a Buckeye game. Right. I just talk about it like it's a factual reality of my life to try to not differentiate myself, in that. And then I think the other thing I really try to do is if people come around and then they ask, they have a need or they have a concern, they have a question, I try to be present for that.
Yeah.
To try to say, okay, you move towards us, let me move towards you, and how that plays out. So, there is a reality that your platform is always going to create expectations and perceptions you can't get around, but being a real person and getting after that, and then preaching and being very clear that nobody's perfect. We all feel like, I'll just say publicly again, as I've said many times, if you come to grace, I'm a failed, flawed person who's a sinner who makes mistakes. Everybody just should know that. So
cool. All right, one last one here, kind of just in that idea of your communication style. How do you walk through helping the community know and understand the goals, the vision, why your church is there? So kind of maybe the vision side, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's the church community, and then there's the communities. And I think the church community, it's how are you continuing to onboard people into more of your core? And there's a lot of different ways that happens, beginning with how do you structure your weekend services, or how do you structure your gatherings, how do you structure new to your church classes, all the way down to do you have membership, and how do those people serve, and groups and all that. So there's all of that, and in those various environments, there's strategic ways that you're getting people on board into the community with that. To your community, I think, whatever your vehicles are that are outward facing, your social media, your website, all those things, you have to ask yourself, what do you want those to say, and are they actually accomplishing things? So it's interesting for us, we often talk about with our social media, is this a front lawn post, or is this a family living room post? And it's interesting when we will post a front lawn post, some of our Grace Fellowship people that are in our church, they don't like it. They're annoyed by it. They're that doesn't feel like it's for us. And we're that's because it wasn't for you. It was for the front lawn, for the community. And then there's other times where sometimes people who are very outward focused will say, that doesn't feel like we're talking to the front lawn. I'm that's because we weren't. We were talking. Yes. And so this ability to be able to figure out how you toggle back and forth between who you're messaging to is complicated. I'm certainly not saying we've cracked the code, but having intentionality to understand that. And then how are you becoming, so you've got your public facing things that are there, but then what are you doing to go into those spaces, and what are you creating? And so, for example, at one of our campuses this week, we just had a free sports camp all week for 50 kids that were allowed to come in our community, no charge to them. And one of the grounds to come was you couldn't go to our church. So nobody from our church was there, and done well, great experience. So how do you get in front of your community? And there's, again, all kinds of strategies of community blitzes, and what does it look like to go reach out in the community? What does it look like to serve the community? And when you serve the community, are you marketing? Are you loving them? Yes. Yeah. I mean, working through all those things. But the bottom line is you got to get in front of them and be a part of that.
All right. I got one last thing that just came to my mind as you're sharing that. So one of the maybe things that I've learned from you and quoted the most, what is it, like when you hear somebody quote something, then you give them credit the first time, and the second time
eventually it's yours.
You're like, someone said, there's probably people who will quote me on this now, but your portable, memorable phrase in your communication. So even as I'm thinking, as you're talking to your congregation and you're talking to your community who's a guest and people that are new and coming in, explain your theory behind the portable, memorable phrase.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of what we understand about marketing and communication and the way the brain works, and asking yourself, do you want to communicate a lot of things for less people, or and so you're going to say more things for less, or do you want to say less things for more? So one of the things that happened to me early on in preaching is, you run into people in the lobby or people in group that week, and they talk about the sermon. And they would say, I love that your sermon was about. I love that your sermon was about. And I'd get 9 different things about what my sermon was about. And I would think to myself, that's not what my sermon was about. That was a story I told. That was a sub point, but it wasn't the point. Yes. And so I tried to ask myself over time and learning from some people, what is the thing that you feel like if you can get your people to hear this and know this, and everyone's on the same page, this is what you said, that's what's going on. And that's a true principle in small group, in a leadership meeting, communicating to momentum, or communicating a sermon on a weekend. And so we work to have what we call a PMP, a portable memorable phrase, where we've taken what the text says and we say, how do we distill down what the overall point of what that text is in a way that is portable and memorable and that can be passed on. And we feel like that's a part of discipleship. We feel like it's part of getting people in bones. We feel like it allows people to transfer that. And so people, the way they think, the way they learn is in these portable, memorable phrases. Some people refer to it as sticky statements.
Yeah.
How do you get people to memorize things? And so for us, we work meticulously hard in our staff, in our messaging, in various communications to say, what is it that we want to say? I mean, I can remember years ago, I said my PMP for my Momentum talk was less I, more I am. And I still have people that like 9 years later that come up to me and say, I remember when you said that. I was preaching at national conference for our tribe of churches and I said, basically this idea of that uncertain times are weathered and won by the certainty of Scripture.
Yeah.
And people to this day come up and say that and go after that. And so what I've just seen is that's true in my own life. And then when I see it happen in other people's lives, that idea is good. And what it forces you to do is to actually go, what do you want to talk about? So here's the way that we talk about it a lot on our staff, and maybe this will be helpful for listeners. We talk about what is the pen of the sermon. And we say when you talk about a pen, you can talk about the pen, you can talk about where it's made, you can talk about what color the ink is, you can talk about what's going on, but all that is about the pen. That's different than talking about the room. And it is easy to talk about a room for 40 minutes. The room that we're sitting in, I could talk about the carpet, I could talk about the ceiling, I could talk about you, I could talk about the table, and I could easily fill up 40 minutes for that.
Right.
But could I talk about a pen for 40 minutes? And what is true is, if I talked about the room for 40 minutes, you would leave going, oh, he talked about the ceiling, and he talked about the carpet and whatever. But if I talk about a pen for 40 minutes, you'll leave saying he talked about the pen.
Yes.
So what we work hard to say is, what is the pen of what we're talking about? And if we can drill down and say, that's the pen, then you talk about the pen from all the different angles. So Scripture, and Paul, or whether you're talking about Matthew or whatever, they give us these texts, but in the text, the pen might be the concept of forgiveness. So Matthew 18, this story about the big-hearted king, it's about forgiveness.
Yes.
So so forgiven people forgive.
Yeah.
That's the PMP, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to drive that home from all the different angles of the text. So anyways, now I'm preaching. I'm training.
You did that. It's so good. You did that almost as good as I've done it. So I think it's so fun because it's funny you mentioned the momentum phrase. The one that has stuck with me is fill your mark with your maker.
Yeah.
And that was a number of years back as well.
Yeah.
But Keith, you're doing such a great job in your communication style, in wrestling with things behind the scenes before you get there, being professional, understanding that what we say matters. And I just cannot thank you enough.
Yeah, thanks,
I'm excited for what God's going to continue to do in and through Momentum Ministry Partners, Momentum Youth Conference, just because you're involved. Yeah. So thank you. And even to see what God's going to do in and through your church.
Well, thanks for letting me be a part of it. I mean, I don't take it for granted that I get to, whether it's to speak or be a part of Momentum Pro or to sit in a moment like this and talk. And it is my hope that I would steward those various platforms of different sizes very, very well. But I'm very grateful for what your team does and what you do, Eric, and the impact it has. I'm on the other side of having a student who's in college and a student who's here this weekend and 2 more on the way. And so I look at these things not only as a pastor but as a dad, and have seen the benefit of how these environments have shaped my kids. So I'm really grateful for what you guys do.
That's fun. Thank you. Well, thank you for sharing your heart
to
our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Momentum Ministry Partners Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, would you subscribe, rate, and leave us a review? That helps more people discover this podcast. We'd also love for you to share this episode with someone in your network who could benefit from the conversation. Because we want to be your go-to and most trusted resource, we'd love to hear from you. If you have a question or a topic you'd like us to cover in a future episode, send us an email to info@buildmomentum.org. Or you can send us a DM on any of our social media platforms. And if you want to learn more about Momentum Youth Conference, Urban Centers, Grace College Akron, Momentum Marketplace, or Momentum Pro, head over to buildmomentum.org. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.